Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello and welcome to all our listeners. My name is Tim Dimmick and host of today's show. I am very excited to have such a special guest with us today by the name of Marty Hartman. Marty is an incredibly inspirational person and author that has an incredible message to share. You see, Marty was born as a paraplegic with Spina Bifida and was not expected to make it to the age 1. Today, he is 52 and is a trailblazer for what he calls handy capability in his community. Despite his physical challenges, Marty is very athletic, plays many sports like tennis, basketball, bowling, and even coaches Pee-wee teams. Along with his wife Angela and their daughter, Marty resides in Arcadia, North Carolina, and lives life to the fullest. Prior to this interview, during my initial talk with Marty, I was really able to feel his passion to help others facing similar challenges. He wants them to know that not only can they meet those challenges, but accomplish anything they put their mind to. As an author, currently with 2 published books, and a public speaker, Marty is sharing his life experiences and lessons to help and encourage others facing similar problems. Marty, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's an absolutely pleasure that you're here. Marty, before we talk about your writing and learn more about your books, I'd really like to ask you to share with our listeners a little bit about your story growing up, being one of the first children to ever enter the public school system with a disability.
That happened in the mid-'70s. I started out at a school called the Children's Center for the Physically Handicapped, and I started there when I was about 3.5, 4 years old, and I was there until 5th grade. But somewhere in the mid-'70s, they passed the Rehabilitation Act of 1974, and that said that all the children with disabilities had to be put in the public schools. And I was one of the first ones in the Winston-Salem for South County schools to be put into the public schools. The unfortunate part about that was the schools back then really weren't at all physically accessible. In a lot of ways, they weren't mentally or emotionally accessible. And I left a perfectly safe environment with kids with other disabilities and was put into basically an inner-city middle school. The interesting thing about it, though, is the way Winston-Salem for South County did their school system back in the 70s, in the public schools, you went through K through 4 in one school. You went 5th and 6th to a different school. You switched again 7th and 8th, switched again 9th and 10th, and again 11th and 12th. The high schools were only 2 years. But because of the lack of accessible schools, a lot of the kids that I went to school with in the 6th grade, I didn't run into again until 11th and 12th grade back in high school because I was in feeder schools for a different high school.
Okay.
And I learned something very interesting back then because some of the kids that picked on me the worst and how I felt was the meanest to me in 6th grade ended up being some of my best friends in 11th and 12th grade. I had to learn that the reason they picked on me wasn't because they didn't like me. It was because they didn't know how to interact with me because it was something new.
Right. So as life, so we had that even around our schools at that time where we were changing every 2 years too as well. So it had to be very difficult, obviously, not only your new surroundings, but brand new, classmates and that kind of thing to get all used to each other again all over. And like you said, I believe, the challenge with a lot of things in life, especially when dealing with situations like you do, is people don't know how to communicate and how to interact with people with disabilities. They're either felt, uncomfortable, or you're feeling uncomfortable, or a combination of both. So, as life went on, you made it through high school, you graduated through high school, and you went on to get jobs, and you actually hold a full-time job now. So, I know you've had a number of jobs. Can you tell me a little bit about that process of, getting that first job and what that meant to you from the standpoint of your self-esteem and obviously the feeling of worth that gave to you at that point in your life?
Right. Well, my first job actually was in high school. My dad And back then my uncle owned their own painting business, and I went to work for them, working in the new construction sites. What we did is we took a mechanics creeper and took the wheels off of it and put basically back then what would have been the equivalent of skateboard wheels on it. And I used that to maneuver around the work site, and I would paint the baseboards and the walls that I could reach and help clean up around the work sites. And that's not something that you would think of someone, in a wheelchair doing. But I loved it back then in high school. I loved to get dirty, so that job was right up my alley. So, but shortly after high school, I continued with my dad after I graduated. But shortly after high school, I went through the Employment Security Commission to try to find more steady employment. And it so happened a local department store chain across the Southeast called Belt Department Store was looking for people that were physically disabled and could handle confinement, because they were putting cameras in their stores to help watch for shoplifters back then. So I went to work for them. I started out the first 2 weeks as part-time, and the gentleman that was hired for the full-time position had health problems and had to quit, and they offered me the full-time job, and that led to 16 years of working for them. I started out with a big store in a bigger town, but when I ended my career with them, I was working in a smaller store in the town I was actually born in, but I had worked my way up to the loss prevention manager. So the cool thing about that was, not only did I get to watch the people stealing on camera, then I had to go out and apprehend them and bring them back in once they had taken the merchandise. And you'd be surprised the funny looks you get from people when you come out to stop them for shoplifting and you're in a wheelchair. A lot of times they were so...
I can only imagine.
Well, the fun thing was, a lot of times they were so stunned by it that they would be walking back in with me the whole time they could have ran and probably outran me, but they didn't think of that. So, but then after 16 years of that, then I went to the job I have now, which is working for Social Security Administration. And it's just kind of interesting, being a person with a definable disability. I work for the government agency that helps people with disability claims every day. So,
wow, yeah, that's really nice to hear. So, what did that do for you when whether even though it was your first job with family, what did that do for your feeling of self-worth? Because I'm sure there's many people out there with disabilities who, they get to that point where in their life where they need that, they need the interaction with obviously other people. They're looking for it, but maybe are challenged on how to go about doing that and what it actually does for them.
Well, there's so many things it did for me, because if you're dealing with any type of disability, there's all kinds of uncertainty. You don't know what to expect as far as being able to gain employment, much less keep it because of your disability. You don't know how you're going to support yourself, your family. You don't know what's out there for you.
Right.
And it's just, it was really good to know that I could get a job. And it was, like you said, the interaction with other people, because I'm a people person. All of the jobs I had, except maybe the first one, but that one too, you have required interacting with people either by phone or face to face.
Right.
On a regular basis.
Right. And it does make a difference, I'm sure. So prior to, going out and writing your books, because, man, I could listen to your story all day. I'm sure, as many other people could tell you, too. The inspiration, your drive, your passion. You got into writing these books, and we want to get into those. But prior to your interview, I asked you, what made you want to write books, and what made you, take that initiative to do so? And your response was this. You said you noticed that there weren't a lot of books out there for children with disabilities, and that what was out there were books that were typically written by someone who knew someone with a disability, or they were written in from a very clinical perspective. And then you made this profound statement that I think sums it all up. You said, children, whether they're disabled or not, don't care why they're different. They just want to know that there is someone else out there that is like them and that it's okay for them to be like that. So you taking on these, taking these experiences, and now you're writing books. And the first book is called The Adventures of Wally the Wheelchair, A New Beginning. In addition to this book being written about a little boy who gets his first wheelchair and the independence that it gives him, you're also telling the story from the perspective of the wheelchair. Tell us more about why you're telling the story from that perspective, because this is a great message.
Well, I have to go back in time a little bit for that one. I've always loved to write. One of the first things I can ever remember writing was on a Sunday night in church when I was a small child. One of those where you're fidgeting and looking around, and your mom reaches in her pocketbook and pulls out a pad and tells you to draw something. I've never been one to draw, so she handed me the pad and the pencil and says, "Here, draw." And I wrote a story. And it was a typical story about an ugly duckling. It was nothing fancy, but I had fun writing it. But later on, when I got in high school, I had a senior English teacher that I seemed to constantly butt heads with the whole year. And the last 9-12 weeks of school, my senior year, I really decided to show that teacher what I could do, because we spent a lot of time reading short stories and having to write papers on what we had read. And I really poured everything I could into those. Mm-hmm. And as much as I've had this perfect love-hate relationship with this teacher, it is the last day of school. I am rolling toward the door when the bell rings for the last time, thinking, I'm never going to get this class again. And the teacher calls me over to her desk. And I'm thinking, what have I done now? And she calls me over. I'll never forget what she said to me. She looked at me and she said that I had the most adept use of the English language of any student she's ever taught. And I prided myself on my vocabulary, even in high school. And I had to leave her class and go to the library and look up a 5-letter word adept, because I had no idea what she'd said to me. But she also told me she wanted me to use, the talent I have for writing. Unfortunately, it took me 25 years to get back to it, to use it the way she probably wanted me to in writing the book. Mm-hmm. But back to your original question about the written from the perspective of the wheelchair, one of my favorite comic strips when I was younger was Calvin and Hobbes, where the little boy had the stuffed tiger, and the stuffed tiger came to life in the eyes of the little boy. Mm-hmm. And they were always getting into kind of mischief. That's kind of the mentality I want with my books. The wheelchair comes out of the eyes of the little boy, and they're constantly getting into adventures and taking the wheelchair places you would normally think of a wheelchair going.
How about that? So what about the message from, I know in talking with you, you said that, one of the reasons that you wrote the book that way was from the perspective of the wheelchair, was because the wheelchair sat there thinking about all the things it could have been made into, but instead was made into a wheelchair. And then you're focused on what it is made to be. And I think there's a really important message in there from your standpoint, having disabilities and looking at your life. And you could also say, why me? And instead taking the focus of, this is who I am and this is what I'm made to be.
Well, one thing about the book, too, like you said, the wheelchair sits in the window of your typical small-town medicine shop. And all the people walk by day after day, and nobody wants it. It feels kind of unloved and unwanted, unneeded. It doesn't have a purpose. So it sits there and it dreams about the fact it could have been made a plane, a train, or a race car, something really fancy that had really important jobs. But then one day walks a man carrying a little boy that can't walk, and he overhears the conversation that they need a wheelchair for the little boy. And that's when the owner of the store comes over and gets him out of the window, dusts him off, and the little boy sits in a seat. And that's when he realizes what he was made to do.
Right.
And the big thing about that is, as much as my story, that story is about a little boy that gets a wheelchair and the independence that wheelchair gives that little boy, it's even more so about the wheelchair sitting in the window of that medicine shop, dreaming about all the things it could have been, instead of focusing on what it was made to do. Because how many of us, even as adults, don't still do that today at some point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's just a really powerful message to me. You know, when I heard that perspective of it, I was like, wow, that not only is it creative, it's just the power in that message is phenomenal. So you've gone on and you've written a second book. Again, The Adventures of Wally the Wheelchair, but Wally Goes to School. This book's based on your memories of when you went to a school called the Children's Center for the Physically Handicapped. Can you share with us a little bit about this book and how it differs from the first?
It differs from the first because, some time has passed. Wally and Timmy have been exploring their surroundings at home, and they basically explored them to the point that Mom and Dad think it's time for Timmy to be around the little boy, to be around other kids. So then they hear about the school, and they make decisions. It's time for him to go. And initially, Timmy is not excited about it at all, and there's all kinds of stress there for him because his routine's about to change. And Wally doesn't understand why Timmy's so upset about that, because he thinks it's a perfect way to go and learn more about other kids and get to explore more, different places. And at some point, early in the book, Timmy's in bed and he's basically thinking out loud, talking about he doesn't want to go. If Mom's not there, who's going to make him lunch? And one of the things he says is, what if somebody laughs at me? And that's when Wally understands that Timmy's afraid to go out because he's afraid somebody's going to laugh at him because he's in a wheelchair. But when they get to the school, they encounter kids in wheelchairs, kids that use walkers, kids that use crutches and have braces. They even encounter, a blind child, a deaf child. So there's kids with all different disabilities and all different shapes, sizes, and colors. And as the day goes on and they have fun and they really get accustomed to their surroundings, then at the end of the day, Wally's looking around and he figures all this out. And he's wondering why their maker made them all so different and made them with the challenges they had. And then he remembers back his days in the window of the medicine shop when he was wondering why he was made the way he was and how that turned out. And he realizes that even though they're all different and they all have their special challenges, that they're all just fine the way they are.
Right. What a great message. As we've heard, through your writing, you're trying to help and inspire others with all types of disabilities. As a person who's been challenged, himself to overcome these difficulties that you've faced, from, the very young age, infant, all the way up to this point in your life, what would you say some of the biggest misconceptions are that others like yourself, are facing as they're growing up, probably at an earlier age, because obviously the older you get, the more you learn to deal with them. But what are some of the biggest misconceptions that, young people face with these type of disabilities, or any disability for that, matter? And what kind of advice can you give them to overcome them?
Well, I'm going to take your question kind of in a different angle, because this is one of the things that I've learned through promoting my own book and going out and talking to groups and talking to children. Or I've shared my book with everything from preschool to senior citizens and everything in between. But one thing I've learned is as much as things change and they stay the same, because I can still go out now, even after all these years, and even though disabilities are more focused, and people will stare, or you can hear people whisper, or, kids especially. I mean, this is not a problem because I love it, because I love kids. Mm-hmm. But, you'll hear kids ask questions. The really fun thing is you can go to the store and you'll hear, Mommy, 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 why is this? Why do you like this? Why this? Why that? And that was another motivating factor for writing my book. When my wife and I first got married, we were going to the grocery store one Saturday. We're going in the store, and there's this mother coming out with the child. And the child sees me, his eyes fly open, his mouth drops. And you hear him, Mommy, 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 why is he in the chair? Why are his legs short? Why this? Why that? And Mommy grabs him by the arm, and she's pulling him across the parking lot. And you hear her go, shh, shushing the child. Mm. And I'm thinking, my legs don't work, my ears work fine.
Right.
And my wife knew what was coming next. I did a 180 and I started chasing the child across the parking lot. I chased him down just so I could answer his questions. And I'm sure it embarrassed the mother to death, but I mean, by the time I was done, the child had his answer to his question and he was happy.
Right.
But back to the question a little more directly, one thing I've learned, even especially about me, because of my disability, I have people look at me and see what's on the outside. They see the chair. They see limitations. They make a surface judgment on me every day based on what's the outside.
Right.
But the one thing I've learned, I do that in so many different ways about people on the outside all the time. So, you know, it's kind of a learning process for all of us.
Sure.
You know, not to judge what's on the outside. Right. Another thing that stands out with me is I got to share my book 3 years ago or so with a class of exceptional children at a local high school. And there was a young man there that has gone to college now. He has very severe cerebral palsy. And for those who don't know what's involved there, its worst cases, it leaves people unable to communicate, and it can really leave them, you know, in a state of not knowing. But this child, a young man now, even though he could not communicate, and his muscles were body was very rigid, kind of like someone that had a stroke, he could maneuver his own power chair. And in those classes, he was hooked up to a microphone and a computer. And what he could do is he could type in to his computer. Like when I was talking, he had a question. And he typed his question into the computer, and the computer spoke for him.
Right.
I had seen technology that on TV, but I never encountered it face-to-face. And that just happened that day that I got to go. My daughter got to go with me. And she was out of school, and she's always been fascinated by this kind of stuff because of having a dad with a disability. Mm-hmm. And when he did that, I mean, listen, her face was priceless.
Yeah.
I mean, it was worth it for that company right there. But again, I said that to say this. You know, I'm sure people judge him every day and see his limitations. They don't understand that even though he may not be able to communicate, kind of very brilliant mind in there, he does know what's going on.
Right.
And, you know, there's value there.
Absolutely. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that with us. Marty, we could go on for hours talking about this subject, and I'm enjoying every minute of it because I love your inspiration. But we need to tie this thing up. So in closing, I'd like to let people know how that they can find your books and how can they contact you if they would like to do so.
Okay. The best way to find my books, both of them are on Amazon.com, and the first one is on in Kindle version as a digital book. Mm-hmm. The second one will be there. I just haven't gotten that one up and running yet. The best ways to contact me is either through my website, wallythewheelchair.com, or either they can email me at wallythewheelchair@yahoo.com.
Okay, fine.
And if they would like to follow me or connect with me there and even contact me, I do have a Facebook page for the book, and that's where I do a lot of my promoting for my book and my events. And it's just the title of the book, Wally the Wheelchair, at Facebook.
Great. Well, thanks, Marty. On behalf of Business Innovators Magazine and Radio, I want to say thank you for taking the time to join us today, and keep up the great work because, you know, there are just tons of people that need to hear your story, and you certainly can give them the courage and inspiration that I'm sure they need. It was a true pleasure. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this wonderful opportunity.
You're quite welcome.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.